The first sound was the clean, percussive bite of the axe into pine. It was a solitary sound in the valley, a single heartbeat against the vast, silent flesh of the forest. Elias, barely a man at 19, swung the axe with a rhythm born of grief and necessity. His parents' graves were still fresh on the hill behind the half-cleared plot of land, 2 mounds of dark earth that the coming winter would soon cover in a blanket of white. He did not look at them. He looked at the tree, at the widening wedge of pale wood, at the spray of chips that smelled of resin and cold air. Beside him, a lanky, brindled dog with intelligent brown eyes sat patiently, head cocked, ears twitching with each swing. Barrow had been his father's dog, but now he was Elias's shadow, a silent witness to the lonely work. When the tree fell, it surrendered with a great sighing crack that echoed off the far ridge. Elias paused, breathing hard, his hands already blistering. This was the 73rd tree. He had counted. His father's journal, bound in worn leather and filled with a cramped, precise script, lay open on a stump nearby, its pages held down by a rock. It spoke of foundations, of thermal mass, of prevailing winds and the tyranny of cold. It was his only inheritance, besides the dog and the deed to this land. The journal did not speak of sorrow, only of physics and timber and stone. So Elias focused on physics and timber and stone. He spent the first month not building up, but digging down and laying out. He cleared a wide 30-foot square, far larger than any cabin needed. He hauled fieldstone from the creek bed, his back screaming in protest, his muscles burning with a fire that kept the chill of solitude at bay. He laid a foundation 3 feet thick, a solid, uncompromising slab of granite and mortar. It was this foundation that drew the first visitor. Silas Blackwood reined in his horse at the edge of the clearing, a tall, raw-boned man whose face was a roadmap of harsh winters. He looked from the sprawling stone base to the small figure of Elias, then back again. "That's a foundation for a fortress, boy," Silas called out, his voice rough as bark. "You planning on fighting off the whole Sioux nation?" Elias straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a dirty glove. "Building a house," Silas grunted, a sound of profound skepticism. He'd known Elias's father, a good man, but always full of strange ideas. "A house that big, you'll never heat it. The winter will eat you alive. Your father, God rest him, he built a proper cabin, 16 by 20, snug." He gestured vaguely toward the burnt remnants of the old family home, a tragedy that had taken both of Elias's parents in a flash fire a season ago. "I have a plan," Elias said quietly, his voice barely carrying. "A plan?" Silas spat a stream of tobacco juice near his horse's hooves. "Plans don't stop a north wind in January when it's 20 below. That thing, it's a barn. You'll freeze solid by Christmas." He shook his head, a gesture of pity and dismissal. "Wait until winter." With a flick of the reins, he rode on, leaving Elias alone with his stones and the quiet certainty of his father's words. Barrow whined softly and nudged his hand, as if to dismiss the man's doubt. Elias just picked up another stone. The journal said the earth was a blanket. You had to invite it in. He began the walls of the first level, using the largest logs, each one 1.5 feet thick. He notched them with painstaking precision, leaving no gap for the wind to find purchase. The work was slow, a deliberate accumulation of mass. The single room he framed was vast and low-ceilinged, only 7 feet high, with small, strategically placed window openings that faced south. It felt less like a room and more like a cave, a den hollowed from wood and stone. His next visitors were Mr. Thorne, the owner of the lumber mill, and the widow Gable, a woman whose kindness was matched only by her propensity for worry. They arrived in Thorne's buggy, ostensibly to offer condolences, but their eyes were fixed on the strange structure. "Elias," Mrs. Gable began, her hands clasped nervously. "Son, we've all been worried. A boy alone, and building this." She gestured at the low, massive log box. "It's not right. It's like a tomb." Mr. Thorne, a man who measured the world in board feet and profit, was more direct. "It's a waste of good timber, is what it is. You could have built 2, maybe 3 proper cabins with the wood you're sinking into this thing. The walls are too thick, the ceiling's too low. There's no sense to it." He tapped a log with his cane. "Whatever fool notion your father put in your head, you'd do well to forget it. Sell me the timber you've got left. I'll give you a fair price. You can board with the Gables for the winter." "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Thorne. I'm grateful for your concern, Mrs. Gable," Elias said, his gaze steady. "This is my home." His quiet finality left no room for argument. They left as Silas had, shaking their heads, their voices carrying on the wind, a chorus of disapproval. Stubborn as his father. He'll learn his lesson when the first blizzard hits. A tragedy waiting to happen. Elias ignored them. He went back to the journal. His father's script was clear. Cold air falls. Heat rises. A house should not fight this. It should use it. A house is a series of thermal layers, a gradient from the earth to the sky. He looked at the drawing beside the text. It was a simple sketch of 3 boxes, stacked one on top of the other, each smaller than the one below it. When he finished the roof of the first massive level, he did not stop. To the town's astonishment, he began framing a second story. But it wasn't a proper second story. It was another, smaller cabin built directly on the roof of the first. It was set back 10 feet from the edge on all sides, creating a wide, flat walkway around its perimeter. The structure was beginning to look like a child's clumsy stack of blocks. The laughter in town grew louder. They called it Elias's Folly. They called it the Wedding Cake House. One afternoon, a different visitor appeared. It was Anna Blackwood, Silas's daughter. She carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth. She was quiet like Elias, with observant eyes that missed nothing. She didn't mock. She didn't offer pity. She just watched him hoist a log into place with a system of ropes and levers he'd devised. "My father says you're going to freeze," she said, her voice soft. Elias secured the log and wiped his hands on his trousers. "He might be right." "I don't think so," she said, surprising him. "You work like a man who knows something the rest of us don't." She held out the basket. "I brought you bread and stew. You can't live on dried jerky and stubbornness." He accepted the basket, his calloused fingers brushing against hers. He felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. "Thank you." "Why is it shaped like that?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over the peculiar tiers. "The boxes." He hesitated. No one had asked with genuine curiosity before. "The bottom floor is for storage and work. It borrows warmth from the ground. The second floor is for living. It will catch the heat that rises from below. The top floor is for sleeping. It will be the warmest of all." He paused, feeling he'd said too much. "It's just an idea." "It's a smart idea," she said simply. Barrow, who was wary of everyone, walked over and rested his head on her knee. Anna smiled and scratched him behind the ears. From that day on, she came every few days, sometimes with food, sometimes just to sit and watch, a quiet presence that made the solitary work feel less lonely. He built the second level with the same obsessive care as the first. The logs were smaller, the ceiling a standard 8 feet. He built a fireplace and chimney out of river stone, a massive central column that rose straight through the heart of the first floor, through the living space of the second, and up past the third. It was the spine of the house, a conduit for heat. Finally, he built the third level. It was the smallest yet, a single room no bigger than 16 by 16 feet, nestled on top of the second story like a watchtower. This was the sleeping loft. When it was done, the structure was complete, a bizarre 3-tiered pyramid of logs that looked utterly alien in the valley of simple, gabled saltbox cabins. It was ugly, defiant, and finished. As the aspens turned to gold and the air grew a sharper edge, Elias turned his attention inward. He chinked every gap with a mixture of mud, moss, and horsehair, working his way over every square inch of the enormous surface area. He built the vents his father had designed, small, closable wooden slides in the floor of the second and third levels, positioned directly above the massive stone chimney. The idea was simple. As the stone column heated, it would radiate warmth. The rising air would pass through the vents, creating a slow, constant circulation. Heat from the second floor fire would naturally rise to warm the sleeping loft above. Then came the earth. He spent 2 weeks with a shovel and wheelbarrow, piling dirt against the thick stone foundation of the first floor, burying it 4 feet deep on all sides. This was the final straw for the onlookers. "He's burying his own house now," the talk went at the general store. "The boy's gone mad from grief." Silas Blackwood rode by again, stopping for a long time. He didn't say a word, just stared at the banked earth, the stacked boxes, the whole impossible thing, and slowly shook his head before riding away. Elias's final preparation was for fire. He spent the last weeks of autumn cutting and splitting wood with a feverish intensity. He stacked it in long, neat rows against the south wall of the first level, under the wide overhang of the second-story roof, cord after cord, until he had a mountain of fuel. He stacked 17 cords of oak, birch, and pine. It was enough, the townspeople whispered, to last a normal family 3 winters. The first snow came silently in the night, a fine dusting that clung to the tiered roofs and outlined the strangeness of his creation against the gray sky. The air was still and cold. Elias went inside, Barrow at his heels. He laid the first fire in the second-floor hearth, using dry pine for kindling and a solid log of oak for endurance. The fire caught quickly, its light dancing on the new wood walls. He closed the heavy plank door. The silence inside was profound. The thick walls, the banked earth, the sheer mass of the structure seemed to swallow all sound. There was no wind whistling through the chinks, because there were no chinks. There was only the soft crackle of the fire. He waited an hour, letting the heat build in the stone of the chimney. Then he began to walk. The first floor was cool, the air still and dry. He had a thermometer his father had owned, a simple mercury instrument. It read 40 degrees, a cellar temperature, perfect for storing wood, tools, and preserves. He climbed the sturdy ladder-like stairs to the second floor. The warmth hit him immediately. It was a comfortable, radiant heat, emanating from the stone chimney and the fire itself. The thermometer read 68 degrees, a perfect living temperature. He opened the vent in the ceiling near the chimney. A gentle, almost imperceptible current of warm air began to flow upward. He climbed the final set of stairs to the sleeping loft. The difference was immediate and astonishing. The air was thick with warmth. The low ceiling trapped the rising heat, holding it like water in a cup. The stone of the chimney here was almost hot to the touch. He set the thermometer on the small table beside the bed he'd built into the wall. He watched the mercury climb slowly, steadily. It stopped at 77 degrees, 9 degrees warmer. Barrow padded up the stairs, turned 3 circles on the thick bearskin rug, and lay down with a contented sigh. Elias sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the small, high window. Snow was falling faster now, fat, heavy flakes blurring the edges of the world. The valley was disappearing into whiteness, but inside his stacked box house, it was quiet, it was still, and it was warm. He had a plan. It would work. Winter arrived not as a guest, but as an occupying army. The initial snows were a mere scouting party. The main force came in the second week of December, a blizzard that the old-timers would later call the Great White. It began with a sky the color of a lead plate and a wind that moaned through the pines like a gathering of ghosts. The temperature plummeted, 10 below, then 15, then 20. The snow didn't fall. It flew horizontally, a blinding, scouring wall of white that erased the world. Inside his fortress, Elias was calm. He tended the fire, keeping it steady and hot. He moved through his 3 worlds, a master of his own climate. The ground floor remained a constant, chilled 40 degrees, a perfect buffer against the frozen earth outside. The second floor, his living space, held at a comfortable 68, the air rich with the smell of burning oak and the stew Anna had brought him just before the storm hit. The sleeping loft above was a sanctuary of deep warmth, the thermometer hovering at 77. He could feel the house working, the massive logs and banked earth resisting the wind, the central chimney breathing heat into each level, the simple physics of rising warmth creating a haven of layered comfort. For 3 days the storm raged without pause. The snow piled in prodigious drifts, burying fences, swallowing sheds, climbing the walls of the cabins in the valley. The wind was a physical force, a battering ram that sought every crack, every weakness. For the other residents of the valley, it was a battle for survival. On the 4th day, the wind lessened, but the snow continued, heavy and relentless. The world was silent, muffled under a blanket of white that was now more than 6 feet deep in the clearings. It was in this profound silence that Elias heard it, a desperate, muffled shouting. Barrow heard it first, his head snapping up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Elias went to the door of the second level, the one that opened onto the wide roof of the first. He cracked it open. The cold was a physical blow. A figure was struggling through the waist-deep snow on the roof below, a ghost in the swirling white. It was Silas Blackwood. His face was caked in ice, his breathing ragged. He wasn't shouting in anger, but in desperation. "Elias, for the love of God, boy, open up!" Elias helped the frozen man inside, slamming the door against the invading cold. Silas collapsed on the floor, shaking violently, his clothes stiff with ice. Barrow sniffed him cautiously before backing away to the warmth of the hearth. "The gables," Silas gasped, his teeth chattering. "The roof, the snow load, it collapsed, the whole back end of their cabin. They're freezing to death. My place, the wind found a way in. It's colder inside than out. We're freezing." He looked around the room, his eyes wide with disbelief. He could feel the warmth on his skin. He could see the steady flame in the hearth. There was no draft. "How?" he whispered, looking from the solid walls to the ceiling. "How is it so warm?" "The chimney," Elias said simply, handing him a mug of hot coffee he'd kept on the hob. "And the walls." "We need help," Silas said, his voice gaining strength from the warmth and the coffee. "The Gables, their little girl." Elias didn't hesitate. He pulled on his heaviest coat, wrapped his face, and grabbed a coil of rope. "Stay here, keep the fire fed." He looked at Silas. "You'll be safe here." Plunging into the storm was like diving into an ocean of ice. The snow was so deep, it was like wading through heavy sand. He followed Silas's tracks, a half-obliterated trench in the white landscape. It was less than a quarter mile to the Gables cabin, but it felt like traversing a continent. He found what was left of it, a gaping hole in the roof, the interior filled with snow. Mr. and Mrs. Gable and their 7-year-old daughter were huddled in the one remaining corner, wrapped in every blanket they owned, their faces blue with cold. Getting them back was an ordeal. Elias tied the rope around his waist and had them hold on, breaking a trail through the suffocating drifts. He half-carried the little girl, her small body frighteningly still. When they finally stumbled through his door into the impossible warmth of the second floor, Mrs. Gable burst into tears of sheer, unadulterated relief. Silas had the fire roaring. Elias settled the family near the hearth, wrapping them in his own dry blankets. The little girl, Mary, began to revive, her shivering slowly subsiding. "I don't understand," Mr. Gable stammered, his eyes darting around the room. "Every other cabin is an icebox. The wind, it cuts right through." Before Elias could answer, there was another shout from outside. This time it was 3 men from the lumber mill, sent by Mr. Thorne. Their own bunkhouse was losing the battle against the cold. One of them had frostbite on his hands. Elias brought them in. The second floor was becoming crowded, a small pocket of humanity huddled against the apocalypse. The final arrival was the most surprising. Near dusk, a figure appeared, looming and dark against the snow. It was Mr. Thorne himself, the richest man in the valley, whose grand house on the hill had 15 rooms and 4 fireplaces, was defeated. His fine windows had been no match for the wind, his vast, high-ceilinged rooms impossible to heat. He stood in the doorway of Elias's cabin, his pride stripped away by the brutal, egalitarian cold, and simply said, "My wife is unwell. We need shelter." Elias just nodded and stepped aside. The Thornes' great house had become a palace of ice. Elias's folly had become the valley's ark. That night, 15 people sheltered in the stacked box house. The men and women stayed on the warm second floor, crowded together, sharing stories of their own failing cabins, their voices a low murmur of awe and disbelief. The children, Mary Gable and 2 others, were taken by Anna Blackwood, who had arrived with her father up to the sleeping loft. Silas, his skepticism completely annihilated, climbed the stairs to the 3rd level himself. He stood in the small, cozy room, feeling the thick, still warmth. He held his hand over the floor vent, feeling the gentle current of hot air rising from the living space below. He put his hand on the stone of the chimney. It radiated a deep, penetrating heat. He looked at the thermometer on the wall. 77 degrees. He came back down the stairs, his face a mask of wonder. He walked over to Elias, who was quietly checking the chinking near a window frame. He put a heavy hand on the young man's shoulder. "I'm sorry, boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I laughed. We all did. We called you a fool." He shook his head. We were the fools. You didn't just build a house. You built— I don't know what you built, but it saved us." Elias just looked at him. My father had a plan. The storm raged for 2 more days. The community inside the cabin organized itself. They shared what little food they had. Anna and Mrs. Gable cared for the children. The men took turns fetching wood from the massive stacks on the first-floor roof, a perilous journey of only 20 feet that felt like a polar expedition. Through it all, the house performed its quiet miracle. The fire in the hearth never faltered. The stone spine of the chimney never cooled. The tiered layers held their gradients of warmth, a perfect system of shelter. They were an island of life in a world of white death. When the storm finally broke, the sun that rose was pale and watery, illuminating a landscape transformed and brutalized. The valley was buried, roofs had collapsed, livestock had frozen in the fields. It was a scene of utter devastation. But from the chimney of the strange, tiered house, a steady plume of smoke rose into the clear, frigid air, a signal of survival. As the people of the valley began to dig out, to count their losses, a new understanding dawned. The cabins that had stood for generations, the traditional time-honored designs, had failed. They were drafty, inefficient, and vulnerable. The one structure that had not only survived but had thrived, offering warmth and safety, was the one they had all mocked. Elias's folly was the only home left truly standing. The thaw was slow, both in the snowpack and in the minds of the people. As the valley emerged from its white tomb, the community began to gravitate toward the stacked box house, not with ridicule, but with a deep and humbled curiosity. They would stand at the edge of the clearing, looking at its strange, tiered form, no longer seeing an ugly anomaly, but a work of quiet genius. Silas Blackwood was the first to cross the threshold of student to teacher. He came to Elias not with advice, but with a request. "The journal," he said, his voice low and respectful. "Your father's book. Will you show me?" Elias led him inside, to the warmth of the second floor. He laid the worn leather-bound book on the table. Together, they turned the pages. Elias, who spoke so little, pointed to the diagrams, the meticulous calculations of thermal mass, the notes on how the Earth's constant temperature could be used as an anchor against the winter's fury. He explained the principle of the thermal gradient, how each level was designed to capture the rising heat of the one below. Silas, a man who had built a dozen cabins in his lifetime with his own 2 hands, traced the drawings with a calloused finger. "Stacked air," he murmured, reading a note in the margin. He treated the air itself as a layer of insulation. He looked up at Elias, his eyes filled with a profound respect. "Your father wasn't just a farmer, he was an engineer." That spring, there was no talk of rebuilding the old way. The conversation in the valley had changed. It was now about southern exposures, earth berming, and central chimneys. Mr. Thorne, his arrogance frozen out of him by the Great White, offered Elias the full resources of his mill. "Whatever you need," he'd said, standing on the porch of the tiered house, hat in hand. "Timber, tools, men, just teach us." Elias did not become a preacher or a leader in the traditional sense. He remained quiet, patient. He did not lecture. He demonstrated. He would take men to the woods and show them how to select the thickest, straightest trees. He would lay out new foundations, wider and deeper than they had ever seen. He shared the knowledge from his father's journal freely, holding nothing back. He taught them how to notch the logs for a windproof seal, how to mix the chinking for maximum insulation, how to build the stone chimneys that would become the warm heart of their new homes. That summer, the valley was filled with the sound of construction, but it was a different kind of building. On the ashes of the old, new structures rose, modeled after Elias's design. They were not identical copies. Each family adapted the principles to their own needs, but the core ideas were there. The massive, low-ceilinged ground floor for work and storage, the warm central living area, the cozy sleeping loft above. The valley began to be populated by tiered houses, their stepped roofs creating a unique architectural signature born of hard-won wisdom. Elias and Anna were married the following autumn in a simple ceremony on the wide, second-story roof of the house he had built. The entire valley attended. Silas Blackwood, giving his daughter away, clapped Elias on the back and said, "For all to hear, I thought my daughter was marrying a stubborn fool. Turns out she's marrying the wisest man in this valley." Years passed. The memory of the Great White faded from a raw wound to a cautionary tale told to wide-eyed children. But its lessons were literally carved into the landscape. The tiered houses stood as testament, their smoking chimneys a sign of the valley's resilience. The community was stronger, safer. The winters were still harsh, but they were no longer a terror. They were simply a season to be weathered in the warmth and security of homes built on a better principle. Elias and Anna raised 3 children in the stacked box house. They grew up learning the rhythms of the seasons, the language of the forest, and the physics of warmth. They learned the stories behind their strange and wonderful home, a place that was not just a shelter, but a symbol of their grandfather's foresight and their father's quiet persistence. One mild spring afternoon, many years later, Barrow, now old and gray-muzzled, lay down in a patch of sun on the porch and did not get up again. He had been a constant, silent companion through the lonely construction, the brutal winter, and the peaceful years that followed. His passing was quiet, a gentle end to a long and loyal life. Elias buried him beneath the tall pine at the edge of the clearing, the same tree where the dog had so often waited patiently while he worked. He carved a simple stone for him, Barrow, a good dog, a witness. It marked the passing of an era, a final closing of the chapter on the solitude that had forged him. Time flowed on, smoothing the sharp edges of memory. Elias grew older. His hands, once blistered and raw from the axe, became gnarled with age, but they were still strong. His hair turned the color of the winter snow, but his eyes remained clear and observant. He became the valley's patriarch, a living legend. Newcomers would be shown his original house, now weathered to a silver gray, and told the story of its creation, of the laughter, and of the great storm that had silenced it forever. He taught his grandchildren how to read the sky for weather, how to stack wood so it dried perfectly, and how to listen to the silence of the forest. He would sit with them by the fire in the great second-floor room, the same fire that had warmed the desperate survivors of the Great White, and he would show them his father's journal. The pages were brittle now, the ink faded, but the ideas within were as powerful as ever. "Knowledge is the best shelter," he would tell them, his voice a low rumble, "and patience is the best tool." When he was 83 years old, Elias passed away peacefully in his sleep, in the warm, cozy loft at the very top of his house, the warmest place in the valley. Anna had gone before him by 3 years. They buried him on the hill next to his parents and beside his wife, in the shadow of the house he had built. The house itself outlived them all. It became a monument. No one lived in it anymore. It was preserved by the town, a museum to its own history. Generations of children would be taken there to learn the story of their community's survival. They would run their hands over the massive logs, marveling at their thickness. They would climb the stairs, feeling the distinct change in temperature from one level to the next, a subtle but undeniable proof of the principles at work. They would stand in the top-floor sleeping loft and imagine the young, solitary man who had trusted his father's strange ideas against the ridicule of the entire world. The grave marker the townspeople erected for Elias was made of the same creek bed granite he had used for his foundation. The epitaph was simple, carved deep into the stone to withstand the wind and the snow for centuries to come. It did not speak of his stubbornness or his skill. It spoke of his legacy, measured not in timber or stone, but in the lives he had saved and the knowledge he had shared. Elias Coleman, 1852 to 1934. He built a warmer home for us all. From the hill where the gravestone stood, one could look down and see the whole valley. Dotted across the landscape, nestled amongst the pines, were the tiered houses, their stacked roofs a unique and enduring feature of the place. On cold winter nights, smoke rose from their central chimneys, weaving together in the crisp air, a collective signal of warmth, of community, of a legacy built not with words, but with patient, persistent, and unconventional work. The house stood, a silent testament, its strange shape a perfect answer to the questions the winter wind still asked.